Good afternoon. I'm Anna Bradley. I'm the chair of the SRA, and I'd like to welcome you to the second of our series of 3 virtual events in the context of Black Lives Matter. It's great to know that so many of you are on the call today, even though I can't see you. I know you're there somewhere. So please feel free to ask questions during the webinar, but I have to tell you that you'll need to sign into YouTube with a Google account first, and then type your question into the chat room on the right. So if you'd like to do that while I'm just making a couple of introductory remarks, that would be great. I should start by saying that the SRA is really keen through this conversation and beyond it to understand the intersectionality, the join between race and class, because we know it can represent a double jeopardy to many aspiring solicitors. For example, we all know that not having the right connections, or perhaps even not having the right accent, can make it much more difficult to get the work experience which helps you through that first practice door. And of course, if you also identify as Black, Asian, or from some other minority ethnic background, you will often experience a range of other obstacles, including specifically a range of stereotypes, which just add to those difficulties. I think it's fair to say that we are all now pretty well versed in the arguments that speak to the business benefits of diversity. The intellectual argument, if you like, is probably one, but we haven't managed to make as much difference as we would all like, and I think that's where we really need to focus our efforts. For example, we know that private education can make a huge difference to people's chances. So while 19% of solicitors attended an independent or fee-paying school, actually still a very large number as a proportion, given the number of people who go to private schools. But while 19% of solicitors attend such a school, 23% of partners did. So somewhere, more of them are being selected to go up the ladder. And we also know that most of those who attended private schools did so without a bursary. So their parents or some other individuals was paying their fees for them. And this single factor also marks a huge difference between larger and smaller firms. So those firms with more than 50 partners have the highest proportion of lawyers that attended private school. That figure stands at 32%. So just that one characteristic, private education has a huge impact, it appears, on your chances of getting through and up the career ladder. Of course, we also know that Black and Asian lawyers are also very much underrepresented at partner level and in senior leadership positions, especially in the largest firms. So the issue of race and class and how they interact and intersect is complex and nuanced. And I'm really hoping the discussion today will cast some light on this and help us to think about how we can make a difference in each of our roles. And I'm delighted today we've got 2 real experts in this area who I'm going to introduce and ask them to just say a little bit about who they are and where they come from. And I'm going to start with Chris White from Aspiring Solicitors. Chris.
Thanks, Anna. Firstly, massive thanks for inviting me to be involved in this conversation today. I think it's hugely important, not least given the month that we're in for Black History Month, but more broadly off the back of different results that have been published in recent weeks. Aspiring Solicitors is an organisation that promotes diversity across 4 strands: race, social mobility, sexual orientation and disability. And Aspiring Solicitors has been running for just over 7 years now. Before Aspiring Solicitors, I was a corporate lawyer at Norton Rose Fulbright, and since entering the world of D&I 7 years ago formally, I've also taken up positions on the board of Prime, which for everybody I'm sure knows is a social mobility platform giving candidates 16 to 18 work experience from state school comprehensive backgrounds, first gen backgrounds, free school meals, etc. But more recently, I'm also the chair, and proud to be the chair of trustees for the Aspiring Solicitors Foundation, which again is a solely socially mobile focused platform got charity, which grants candidates from lower socioeconomic backgrounds money for laptops, for workwear, for subscriptions to online platforms, which is making a big difference now, and we're really pleased to have a huge amount of support for that. So I won't talk too much about AS and my background further than I already have, but really pleased to be involved in the conversation and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Chris. And Rafael Mccarty from Rare, or RAF, I think, is what we call you.
Yes. My colleague Kura has just joined, and that is because I am incompetent with technology. Chris and Anna witnessed this firsthand. They were privileged to have a ringside seat at my incompetence. But what I have done is I've forwarded the Skype invite to Kura. But Kura, I think you need to get the YouTube channel and follow it like that. Hi, everybody. I am hopefully less ignorant about race and class than I am about Skype. 15 years ago, I set Rare up with a simple goal to get more ethnic minority kids, and particularly black kids, into elite employment. Over the last 15 years, two things have happened to my business. One is it ended up specializing, or at least being very heavily active in the law. And that's because actually lawyers care about this stuff. Whether that's because of a commitment to justice. Justice is kind of not just about the rule of law. At some level, it's about fairness. Whether that's because of the partnership structure, whether that's because I was lucky enough that the first client that ever bought us was Slaughter & May, and whatever Slaughter & May does, other people look up. I don't know why, but we do a lot of business with law firms. The second thing that's happened is we've gone beyond just getting black kids into top jobs. We get a lot of our inspiration from the research that we do. Since 2009, we've published 12 different pieces of research. That research is driven partly from the knowledge we gain by placing candidates in these jobs, and partly from the logs from our contextual recruitment system. Contextual recruitment system, many of you will use, is a piece of software that integrates with your applicant tracking system and gives you valuable information on candidates that helps you make better decisions. Latterly, we've done two new things. We have launched an online platform called Vantage, which effectively is a marketplace where legal recruiters can meet candidates at graduate level and below who are interested in the law. And we've very recently launched Hemisphere, which is an online unconscious bias training platform that is based on research, including video research that we've carried out over the last 5 years. So that's what we do, and I hope that the answers to some of the questions we're able to give you, I mean, some of them are legal questions, or questions about comms, brands, hearts and minds, and so on and so forth, which I'm sure Chris and I will both be able to answer. Chris maybe better than me on some of those things. I think the data we've got and the depth of research that we've done allows for some quite interesting insights, and I'm looking forward to getting into some of that stuff over the next 45 minutes or so.
Thanks very much. So we asked you to submit questions ahead of today's webinar, as well as during the course of it, and I've pulled those together into a number of threads. So if you don't hear your precise question, hopefully you hear the issue you've raised. And the first one I wanted to ask, and I'm going to start with you, Chris, is why it is that when firms talk about diversity, they often fail to acknowledge the importance of class diversity and focus on other aspects of it.
I mean, that's quite loaded in terms of them failing to acknowledge class diversity. I don't think, from my experience with LAS, that we've worked with any firm that has failed to acknowledge class or social mobility as a key issue. In fact, probably given my background, that would be something that nobody would really voice even if they did think that to me, because I'm a state school comp kid, went to a first gen in my family to go to university, and we didn't have any money growing up, and so I'm the social one of the social mobility stories that you could point to that actually got into the profession. I think the issue is that social mobility or class can be invisible, and as a consequence, the importance or the awareness of social mobility in class throughout the process, whether that be from promotion, recruitment processes, and then retention, can in some cases be ignored is probably too strong, but can go unnoticed, whereas ethnicity cannot. And so I think that one of the challenges the profession has, and I've seen this from the anonymised diversity reports that aspiring solicitors have run with a growing number of firms in recent years, is that the profession starts from a back foot. So there are fewer people that are choosing to apply to law firms than the population at universities themselves. And that's an issue. That's a crucial issue for every law firm to consider and to be aware of, because then they need to act accordingly. So there are different stages throughout this process, and there are certain stages that both Raf and I have got different experiences in, but certainly that is a major issue for firms. Unfortunately, and speaking from experience, when you go through the process, there are a number of issues and potential barriers that one can face when being in a firm, with even so far as being on golf courses. When I used to play golf with a collection of law firms and barristers' chambers, you walk onto a golf course as a male, and a white male furthermore, and people make assumptions and start saying things to you that they shouldn't. That wouldn't be said if I was, if somebody was talking about race, they wouldn't, and I was a black individual, they wouldn't start telling me, I would hope, racist jokes. But because I'm a white male, and because I might be seen as one of them, they feel that they can come out with it. They found out pretty quickly they couldn't. But social mobility isn't like that. So you can kind of, that can be hidden. So there's a massive question, and it's brilliant that we start off with that. But I do know that law firms are doing a huge amount more to identify socially mobile talent, and the schemes that we're involved with in the last few years has demonstrated that. And the kind of creation of social mobility index, various reports a Bridge Group have done, been fantastic in alerting people to the issues that exist. And importantly, the stats, and Raf talks about data, the stats is critical across all of these discussions, because only with the stats can we then consider genuine change and reflect on that.
Okay, thanks very much.
Four things to add. Firstly, firms are not interested in class. If your firm is not interested in class, your firm is behind the curve. Most firms do engage on this. You wouldn't have the Bridge Group report Chris mentions that was published, I think, last week or this week, if it hadn't been funded by a number of firms. Point two, it's absolutely right that people from lower percentile schools are less likely to make applications than people from higher percentile schools, even if they have the same A-level grades. We looked at people with A-level grades in English, which is like not a bad proxy for the ability to become a lawyer, right? If you get an A at English A level, you're probably like in the right ballpark in terms of your skill sets. And people from schools in the bottom 80%, which is like quote unquote most normal schools, 19% less likely. Curiously, we also found a group of high-low schools, high achieving schools, state schools, relatively high achieving, with very low levels of applications. And we published a report on these, and we were encouraging clients to go specifically to these schools, because what you've got these state schools where kids are getting good grades, and regardless of which university they go to, they don't make applications. And I think incidentally, I'm sure we'll come on to talk about universities, but it seems to me that the secondary school you attend is at least as determinative of your life chances as the university you attend, which is kind of counterintuitive. Point three, measurement. We lack a consistent way of measuring class. firms that use the CRS, which is most law firms now, 70 plus, yes, you can say, have they got a flag, yes or no? That works pretty well at grad level, but it doesn't work as well as you get higher up the organisation. There's some move to use parental occupation for measuring purposes, but it's not as easy, it's not as binary. There isn't, and so what gets measured gets done. If you can't measure it consistently, it's trickier, right? I think that's part of the reason they're finding this difficult. Final point, very, very quickly, class is not a protected characteristic. That's a good thing. In terms of making changes, that's a good thing, because it means I can say, oh, well, look, this is my bar, but these people went to this type of secondary school, and I understand what the impact is, so I'm going to interview them anyway. You can't actually do that on a protected characteristic anywhere near as easily. So I think that there are many reasons why it is harder to work on class, but class not being a protected characteristic, in my view, actually is not one of them.
Okay. So you both talked about data, and we had a number of questions on metrics and the role of metrics in firms. You talked about the difficulty of finding the right data to collect, and then there are also questions about sort of what you do with that data. And I think a really challenging question for firms and for the profession is the extent to which that data is then made public, such that people can choose to apply to different firms, and also firms that are not doing so well might be held more to account. Of course, is the argument that goes. So what are your thoughts on the importance of firms collecting data, and should that be put in the public domain? Raf, do you want to go first on this one?
Yes, sure. If you don't have data, then you are liable to someone saying, oh, I don't think we do that badly. We've got lots of nationalities here. Of course, nationality and ethnicity are not the same thing. I've heard that so many times. If you have the data, then the argument becomes a different argument. It's like, well, what should our number be? Should we be comparing with the London population? Should we be comparing with the UK population? Should we be comparing with the student population? Should we be comparing with the travel to work? And that's a much more sensible argument in my view. So I think that in terms of race, data collection is the sine qua non of being able to make progress. You have to know where you are if you know where you're going to get to. And then in terms of the data points that you collect, obviously it's about who's coming in. It's also about who's coming out. It's about pay. It's about promotion. It's about attrition. With a bit more sophistication, it's about the allocation of work, appraisal ratings. And then if you spot inequities, you crash right down into the data and you say, what is going on here? And you look for the way biases manifest. So in my corporate group, I've got disproportionate attrition of BAME associates. Qualification, no problem. By 4-year PQE, they're all gone. Why? What's going on? What's written in their appraisals? What's the culture? Is it the kind of thing Chris is talking about? Is it me not giving you the work because I think you're rubbish, and then a year later I say, well, you're rubbish because you never got the work that stretched you? What exactly is going on here? If you don't have the data, you won't even know where your problem areas are. If you don't know where your problem areas are, you're not serious about fixing it. So on ethnicity, yes, you collect the data, you use the standard government categorizations. On our race fairness commitment, which has been signed by 30 odd firms now, and it's free to sign up, we have published the spreadsheets with the templates that we recommend people use, racefairnesscommitment.com. Go on, have a look. That, in our view, is the way to do it. In relation to class, I think the same principles hold. Now listen, we developed the contextual recruitment system because, in our view, it is the most granular and the most accurate way of capturing data of young people at the point of like early careers, you know, internships, vacation schemes, apprenticeships, training contracts, that sort of thing. But it doesn't really matter what metric you use. I mean, you can pull holes in all these metrics, which is the reason we have the CRS. And when you're making granular selection decisions, it's much better to use a CRS. But if I'm trying to understand what's going on top to bottom, state, private, self-identified social class, free school meals none, first gen none, any one of these things is okay. I mean, the stats you quoted at the beginning, Anna, you know, it's enough there for anyone to see, yeah, I've got a problem, right? And that's the point of data. Identify where the problem is so that you can take properly informed action.
Okay, good advice. Thanks very much, Chris. What's your take on metrics?
I mean, as Raf said, I think if you haven't got data, you become powerless moving forward. And I was pretty shocked when I left life as a corporate lawyer and came into the world of D&I, because the first thing that I was asking firms that we started working with was, where have you been and where have you got to? And some major firms that I had those conversations with to begin with, didn't have the data. They didn't have any. So it goes back to Raf's point around, what metrics were you actually collecting, or where is the consistency? Consistency is one step through the data spectrum, but if you haven't collected it, or you don't have historical data, you can't reflect on where you've been and can't project where you want to go. So fundamental to any movement and progression for diversity and inclusion is data, and therefore, again, like Raf said, if firms are not collecting data at all, or they're not analyzing data, they're behind the curve, because certainly the vast majority, if not all, of the clients that we work with are doing that, and they're analyzing in different ways, whether it be using the CRS, whether it be their own internal mechanisms or objectives. The second point, Anna, you mentioned, is around publicity, and this is an interesting topic for me, because it would be very easy for me now to reference some of the law firms that I know have done particularly badly in terms of recruitment of diverse candidates, in terms of groups and different types of firms that we work with, from Magic Circle US firms through to regional niche bespoke practices. But what is that going to do for candidates? What is that going to do for the candidates they're trying to attract, that look at that firm and say, actually, they've got 3% non-white hires last year and the year before? Well, are they going to apply to them? Some may, but many won't. So then the issue becomes quite a circular issue, and they can't recruit people because they haven't recruited them in the past. That said, I do think that it would be very powerful and very positive for law firms that are doing well, like a top 5 firms performance, to be able to say, this is how well we've done, and as a consequence, we've recruited X number of candidates, and these are the best candidates for the job, because it has to come down to that. It has to be around the best for the job and meritocracy, otherwise all of this could fail. So I would be a massive advocate if the SRA were ever to want to publish any reports of their of top performing law firms, but I wouldn't be encouraging across the board publication of statistics, because other firms that are not as far down the journey as others in terms of their D&I progression would effectively be prevented from recovering or from progressing in the direction they might want to have. And I should say, in terms of data, one of the positive things that I'm seeing, certainly when I look at the data that we've had access to in the last few years in particular, there is a genuine movement forward by firms across the board, with potentially the exception of disability. And that's at the graduate level. There is certainly a greater desire and statistical desire to be recruiting more candidates that are Black, Asian or minority ethnic. Statistically, that's being proven by a number of the firms that we work with. Equally, social mobility. We could come on to sexual orientation and disability another point, but I think public data and promotion of success would be brilliant for the profession. And I think if firms are not getting that data, organisations are not considering it, there is a major issue in those organisations.
Yeah, a couple of really important points that you both make there. One about it's good practice that counts, and it's that we should be promoting collectively. Not talking about the SRA necessarily or only, but I think the point you were making, Raf, on sort of speaking against a council of perfection, if you like, in terms of the data that you collect. Some data is better than the perfect data set, so don't over agonize or worry about the science too much. Just get some data down and look from year to year, and you can refine it over a period, which is, I think, what I take from what you're saying, and makes a lot of sense. But you said something else in your comments, Raf, about BAME lawyers moving out of firms, and I know you've done some research on this recently, which you were speaking to, and I guess I wanted to ask you both a question about relating to that, but about law firm cultures. So I'm not a lawyer, and I have never worked in those sorts of firms, and my career has been moving from one place to another, getting different kinds of experience. I'm not used to being in a single firm throughout my career, but that seems to be the way law works. So do you have to be a stayer to be a succeeder in a law firm? And if so, what is it that stops people from staying? What creates that movement which might be antagonistic to their career progression? Again, do you want to start, Raf? Because I know, and maybe talk about the research, and then I'll come to you, Chris.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't know much about the culture of law firms from first-hand perspective, never having worked in one, and I will let Chris answer on that. Very briefly, if you want to become a partner or a general counsel, overwhelmingly statistically, you need to have done at least 5 straight years in private practice at the start of your career, i.e. training contract and 3 years post-qualification. If you move after that, it's fine, and you can certainly move between firms. You could qualify at one firm and move to another firm. But if you go in-house sooner than that, on the basis of the research that I've seen, it's unlikely that you'll reach, quote-unquote, the top of your profession. So, we published this research called the Ethnicity Stay Gap, Closing the Ethnicity Stay Gap, earlier this year, and we got a big chunky data set, about 6,000 anonymized employee records from 9 city law firms, and we found that ethnic minority lawyers stay about 20% less long than their white counterparts, and they are more likely, when they go, they're more likely to leave the profession or to go in-house than they are to go to another law firm. So there is a disproportionate attrition of black and brown lawyers, and actually right now that's a bigger problem. Grad recruitment is pretty good. Most of these guys are doing a pretty good job, but the attrition is significant. So what did our research tell us? Why is this happening? It's basically racism. So if you're a black woman and you go to work, you're going to get comments about your hair. You're going to get comments about, oh, your hair looks different. Have you changed your hair? Is that your hair? Is that a weave? Is that a weave? Is that a wig? What's going on? One woman, she came to work with her hair natural. And a colleague said to her, oh, you look scary like that. Another one was told, oh, you don't look professional. That's who they are. I'm going to work as myself, and I'm told that myself is not okay, it's not professional, it's scary. Of course I'm going to leave. Another woman told me that she spent the entire training contract that she did at her law firm being confused with the only other black trainee. She sat in a room with a bloke for 6 months, and he couldn't even get her name right. How is she supposed to think that she's going to make partner? It's an impossibility. And so to me, what's remarkable is that the gap is as little as it is. Now, of course, we interviewed lots of people. A minority had never experienced racism. And some firms are better than others. And I'm not for a minute saying that the law is the worst. I don't think it is the worst. I don't think the worst would let us anywhere near their data. So I'm not trying to say that this is some kind of hell on earth. It's not. And there are black partners, there are Asian partners. I'm friends with a number of them. One of them said to me the other day, Raf, I love my job. So but I'm just answering the question. Racism is real. Chris talked about it. He talked about this golf course thing. I don't know anything about that. I've never done that. I've never been a lawyer. I've never been on a golf course. And sure as hell, people aren't going to make racist comments to me. But I mean, I'll hand over to Chris because I dare say he can fill in the gaps a little bit more here. But that is what is going on.
Thanks, Chris.
Well, I'm pleased that you've said it stark as that, Raf, because it's unfortunately within law firms, I was very fortunate to work in two very different types of law firms, and go on secondment to different clients in my limited duration in the profession practice. But actually, what is a culture of a law firm like? It's not necessarily the culture in the office on a day-to-day basis. It's what happens outside of the office. It's what's then acceptable in a bar or on a golf course or at a client event, because people's true personalities tend to surface when they've let their guard down, or when they've had a couple of drinks. Then true opinions can come out. And I revert back to the golf course scenario. As a white guy going out onto a golf course with a bunch of predominantly other white guys, and it wasn't entirely white, but almost. That was one of the biggest things that actually drove me to set up aspiring solicitors and leave the profession, to make sure that people coming through didn't have to endure, or at least have to deal with an initial conversation or joke or statement like I had to receive from QCs and partners on golf courses. Very quickly I stamped that out, and at the time. But to Raf's point, even from having set up AS, in terms of the culture, one of our members, who was an East London girl, black female, went on a VAC scheme at a US law firm recently, and at the end of the watch up in this law firm, she was told by the partner, who himself wasn't a white individual, but he said to her, "You were really great, you really did really well, but your accent is too ghetto for this firm." Raf won't shock Raf at all, because he's heard things like that, but that's horrendous. It is racism, and it still exists, and that's why it is crucial for us to have these conversations, to call it out. Silence kills, as we've heard, and when you talk about progression in the profession, and even looking at my own position as a white socially mobile individual, talking about the class piece, I looked up at Norton Rose and the people that were at my firm, and they were fantastic. I was huge supporters of AS, and were it not for them, we wouldn't have progressed. But I only heard one other guy that sounded different to me, and he was a Geordie. And actually he's the only Geordie I've ever heard in any law firm, full stop, at senior level. But it's this, where am I? When I look up, where am I? And yes, it comes back to the circular argument piece, and hopefully in years to come, given the great work that Rare, SEO and other diversity platforms, and AS included, and in the last 10, 15, 20 years have facilitated, this will be less of a problem going forward. But as Raf says, the non-white people are leaving quicker, and so it clearly is still a problem. And having the data to reflect on and to try to move forward is critical that we do that now, mixing the previous point around data. Having data on its own is no value, just doing nothing with it. You need to look forward, you need to have objectives and plans, and to be able to assess whether a period has been successful. What is success in terms of diversity recruitment, or recruitment full stop? Success is getting the best people. But you can only get the best people if you recruit from the widest possible pool. And then, having recruited those individuals, rather than commenting on somebody's hair or on somebody's preference of book, or we going to a show or watching a TV program or a series, and the implicit racism, or kind of apparent hidden racism, although it's very explicit to those on the receiving end of it, and my friends that have told me about it, that has to be removed. And that's the start. The start of that journey, the start of ensuring non-white lawyers are getting to the top of the profession. There are many stages, but the easy things to remove are explicit, overt racism in the workplace. Then you get to the point around work allocation, or around promotion, or around buddy systems, and developing and recognizing we're all different. And actually, what one person excels in one area is different to another person. How do you get the best of somebody? You get the best of somebody if you make them proud of who they are, encourage their difference to be a positive. And the clients are now driving this. And that's the best thing for me. In the last few years, I've seen the clients driving this. and off, I know we'll come on to it shortly, off the horrendous murder of George Floyd and many other black individuals in the US and elsewhere, one of the positives to come from this is now law firms are receiving the client drivers, but they're also recognizing the commercial benefits. And the minute that happens, you've got believers and people that act on money and dividends and profits. Once they've hired an individual that is fantastic, they're not going to go back to how they were, because they've seen the light. They become one of us. They become one of the believers and people that recognize difference is a positive. So yeah, I think that's a major thing in terms of progression, and we have to come together on that. We have to unite as a profession to move forward, and we have to be firm on stamping explicit racism out at the very basic level.
And I mean, there are lots of systems and processes and changes that you've both referred to in all of that, but a key and we know from the Me Too movement, really difficult thing for individuals is to create the conditions in which individuals feel safe to call out racism or sexism or whatever it is themselves, because actually. You both describe circumstances in which individuals experience something completely unacceptable, but frankly, dealing with that can be institutional, but there's nothing so powerful as a direct and individual response, and that you have to be quite brave to do that, don't you? Yeah. I wonder if we could take the conversation about metrics a little bit further and talk about. So someone's just messaged in saying, "Well, what about targets?" So we've got metrics. Should we then be setting targets? And we had a number of questions before the webinar today about. How far we could take what I'll describe as positive action before we reach a point of reverse discrimination, if you like, for want of a better description. So what would you say about setting targets, and how far do you think we should all be prepared to move in terms of positive action? So I'm going to start with you, Chris, this time, if that's okay.
I had this question about a year ago down in Bristol on a panel with some really fantastic speakers, and I was really quite interested to hear a response from one of the panelists who was an Asian QC. And when asked about targets, but then also quotas, the point that he made was the only people that he's ever heard suggest that targets or quotas were not required were white people. And I digested that and thought, wow, actually, that's the same for me. And so are we in a position, and my view is that we have to ensure, for the benefit of what we're all trying to achieve, that the best people are getting into the profession. How we facilitate that, whether it be through, via a combination of targets and different recruitment methods, improving those methods, is up to law firms and the individual organizations that are recruiting candidates, or recruiting individuals laterally or otherwise. I think targets should be put into practice. I think that we should have targets for where we want to be. We know the proportion of individuals that are at universities. We know the percentage of people that are applying to firms. Therefore, surely it cannot be the case that such a small proportion of black candidates are getting training contracts compared to their white counterparts. Does it mean that such a smaller percentage of individuals that are black are not as good as white? Obviously not. It just cannot be the case. So I very much am a supporter and proponent of targets. The point, if we go one step further in terms of quotas, I've got for and against for that, but I certainly think that we should be setting targets, because why wouldn't we? We need to progress. We haven't progressed up to now in as quickly as we would have liked. So yeah, and to the points that Raf's made around the research and other things that Rare have done, if you're seeing an attrition of individuals once they're in at a greater rate to non-white lawyers, then surely you've got to recruit more people to ensure that by the time you come and look at your senior associates for partnership, because we need a diverse leadership, you're going to be in the same position if we don't set certain targets to address that. And the talent is there. That's the frustrating thing. The talent is out there. It just needs to be recruited.
So thanks very much, Chris. Raf?
I mean, I have yet to hear of a business priority that gets met without a target being set. The question isn't whether you set targets, it's what targets. The firms who've signed the race fairness commitment have all committed to 5 numerical targets. 1, black and all ethnic minority, and you would measure those 2 separately. So you'd look at all ethnic minority and you would look at black. Job applicants with given qualifications are as likely to be interviewed as their white counterparts. 2, black and all ethnic minority people at a certain level are paid the same as their white counterparts in a similar performance band and comparable role. 3, black and all ethnic minority people who reach interview are as likely to be offered a role as their white counterparts. 4, black and all ethnic minority people remain at an organisation on average as long as their white counterparts. 5, black and all ethnic minority people performing at a certain level are as likely to be promoted as their white counterparts. Now, if you're recruiting a diverse pool and you meet all of those targets, you will get diverse senior management, diverse partnerships. If you're getting a diverse pool of applicants, you will be recruiting a diverse pool. It's not complex. And actually what you don't need to do is say 40% of our extras are going to be Y by Z date. Because you don't need to, because more than half the people reading law degrees are either black or Asian or from a low socioeconomic background or both. Like, it's not a problem. If you only look at the ones with 3 A's, it's still more than half. So when people give you this thing about, oh, well, you know, diversity is all very well, don't want to compromise quality, the response is, nor do I, May. Open your eyes. Like, it's not that hard, says the man who's never worked in a law firm. But in a sense, because I've never worked in a law firm, because I don't understand the culture, it's really, really easy for me as an outsider to say, here's your pool of really, really smart kids that want to do this job. Here are the metrics you put in place. And that's it, right? It's not hard conceptually. Now, it might mean people have to change the way they think about things, the way they behave, the way they talk. I mentioned this product hemisphere that we've got. And now what is in that? Yes, it diagnoses your biases and helps you, but it also tries to explain how you interview, how you manage someone who's different. So, for example, get their name right. This is how you get people's name right. For example, don't talk to black women about their hair. Just don't. For example, here's a video of 10 candidates interviewing, and the white candidates are all going like this, like this, like this, and the black candidates are all sitting there like this. And these are real candidates. One of them's at Freshfields now as a qualified lawyer. One of them's at Latham's, qualified lawyer. One's at DLA, qualified lawyer. These people are really, really good. You look at the film when they're 19 and they're interviewing, they look terrible. If you listen to them, they don't sound terrible, but they look terrible. They look petrified. And what we're trying to say to people is, listen, the targets, what you need to do is really, really obvious. You need proportionality. You need fairness at every stage. That's it. How do you create that fairness? How do you produce an environment where people are going to get fair treatment? Well, actually, it becomes a technical thing. It's new skills. It's new knowledge. How do you manage someone with whom you have no immediate commonality and you're struggling to build rapport? Once you're telling people, this is what you need to do and this is how we're judging you, it goes from a kind of, oh, shall we set a target conversation, all the way to, okay, here's this technical thing I need to get right. And I know some lawyers and some firms are talking about, in the way that some of the US firms, pro bono hours are part of your appraisal and even your pay, and getting this thing right, having proportionality of outcomes in terms of race amongst your teams. That's where we're going, and that's where we're going to meet these important targets and have, because like lots of these firms now, their intake is pushing 50% black and Asian. So you give it 10, 12, 14 years, 50% of their homegrown partners, I know you recruit laterally, but the ones that aren't laterals should be black and Asian. The ones that they're making up, the new ones, they should be. That's where we want to get to. That's our target.
Okay, so I think lots of things to take away from what you've both said. But the person asking that question was saying, "And what advice do you give to those that are nervous about setting them?" And I think perhaps the winning argument there, which is actually nothing to do with diversity, but is a really powerful management point, is that you don't make a surplus unless you set yourself a financial target. So firms use targets to deliver performance all the time. I mean, I think that's a really important point, Raf. And in a business context, that's probably a good place to start before you move on to. So we need them in this space as well. As you say, perhaps not so difficult. I think you both said perhaps not so difficult to set those targets, particularly in relation to the overall population of entrants. So someone has also been asking questions about what the SRA does in relation to those firms that are behind the curve. And so I'll give myself a question and try and give an answer. So it is the way of regulators that we do things in two ways in particular, some carrot and some stick. Chris talked earlier on about good practice, and that's our carrot, if you like, as a regulator, and we publish and set out good practice on EDI as a matter of course. That we see that as an important part of our role. We're not the only people who do that, but we absolutely see that as an important part of our role. And you'll find a lot of resources on our website in that sort of space, giving examples of some really good things that different law firms have done in this arena. But then we also have some stick. So one of our regulatory principles, Principle 6, says that firms should act in a way that encourages EDI. And while we wouldn't necessarily just use the data that we collect in order to take a view about issues with EDI, it is clear to us that if we were to have a lot of complaints from within a firm, and see a firm acting in a particularly poor way in respect of this principle, we would take action. So stick and carrot is the answer, but good practice, we recognise a hugely important part of that. So I wanted to take us on to the way in which you, or the advice that you might offer people to shift. This is probably going to be our last question, so sort of some key pointers, I guess, but some things that you would use to get firms to move from nice words, importantly strong commitments is another way of describing that, to really strong, good action and better outcomes in this space. So how can firms be persuaded to make that shift, and what would your top 3 steps be in respect of moving the graph in any firm? And I'm going to start with you, Chris, if that's okay.
Sure. I think I don't think firms will need to be persuaded more than they already have been up to this point in knowing that it's critical for their business to be recruiting the best candidates and best lawyers and retaining them. I think the important thing is for greater desire and willingness to educate themselves and to listen to what is currently wrong in their organizations or what needs to be improved, and to enable organizations to draw a line in the sand to say, well, this is where we are. This is where we are in terms of our recruitment. This is where we are in terms of our internal culture, where we are in terms of our ability or inability to promote people, so we can have something to act from. Importantly, when we come back to stats and data, I then think the crucial objective of firms is to implement change. Since I came into the world of D&I hear people all the time talking about D&I without necessarily always talking about results and what have we done and how have we done it and how can we improve from this position and move forward. So ensuring that discussion and kind of ideals and goals are actually realized, that is imperative for us to move down the road rather than kicking the can. We need to make sure that we are able to reflect on action rather than, on its own, just setting objectives. I think what Rare have done and what Raf's done with the, kind of commitments, the race commitment that Raf talked about was fantastic for firms to make that commitment to. But let's make sure that for those firms and others that are going to sign up to it, that they actually then are doing it. And that's the difficult piece, which is the implementation. Only once it's been implemented to whatever degree or whatever success are we then able to reflect to see how we can move forward. And so it all comes back to the data and results, really. But listen, learn, implement, change, I think is my 3 pieces of advice.
Thanks very much. And Raf?
Look, it's got to start at the top, right? So, as my 3-year-old son would say, Daddy, do you care or do you don't care? Go to your senior partner. Do you care or do you don't care? If you don't care, do some PR guff, lurch from guilty spell to guilty spell and forget about it the rest of the time. If you do care, the roadmap's pretty clear. 1, get the data and create an action plan. 2, make sure you've got your ethnic minority lawyers' backs. What does that mean? That means think about seat allocation. Think about work allocation. Think about where people are qualifying. Don't throw people under a bus. Steer people away from problem areas. Ensure as much as you can that the work is allocated in a way that's fair. There's a question about positive action, which I'm afraid I neglected to answer, but this is the point. This is where you want positive action. We don't need positive action in recruitment. Grad recruitment's fine. I mean, it's great, really. It's excellent. But people are leaving 1, 2, 3 years PQE. Run a positive action program for your lawyers of colour. Give them one-on-one executive coaching. Make sure you train your supervisors. Make sure you train your managers. Put into the appraisals, maybe even the pay structures of those running groups and supervising people, that proportionality of outcome by race is critical, i.e. you cannot be a top performer however much you bill if all the ethnic minority associates in your group leave much more quickly than the white associates. And communicate clearly what you're doing. Yes, that might include publishing, for example, your ethnicity pay gap, your ethnicity stay gap, the way you're shrinking that. It will certainly include asking about race and racism in every exit interview, talking about race, why it's important, and how racism is unacceptable in every induction, talking at least once a year to the whole firm about race, including incidents of racism that you have dealt with and what your response has been, suitably anonymized, of course, to protect people's privacy, and making it absolutely clear this is where you are, this is how you're going to get to where you want to get to, and this is your plan. You do all of that, and of course much the same goes for class, so long as you've got your measure that you're happy to use, but our deepest expertise is in race. So long as you do all of that, you are actually addressing this like any other business priority. And you only have to look at the pandemic to see how fast organizations can pivot if they really have to, right? I mean, I had a conversation with a partner at a big national firm in mid-March. He said, well, they haven't sent us home. I think they don't have enough software licenses. And that's why. And it's ridiculous. I'm sitting on this big open plan office with people coughing and hacking, and God knows what they've got. Well, then there's a lockdown and everyone has to work from home. Guess what? The software licenses just appear. So this is totally achievable.
So I think one of the key things that you both talked about there, because very often in these conversations, people focus on the entry point and get actually sort of over exercise perhaps about the dangers of positive discrimination in relation to recruitment. And actually, what I'm hearing you say is that what happens at that stage is it's an issue, but it's not as much of an issue as what I would describe as kind of cradle to grave planning through an organisation about how we support people in getting through their careers, regardless of their background, and particularly focusing on those areas which people with different aspects of a diversity, well, they don't have the diversity challenge, the organisation has the diversity challenge, but focusing on how you can support them and coach them and mentor them, as you're saying, all the way through that process, and constantly analysing the data to see what it is that's getting in the way. So an emphasis, as I say, not just on the start, but on the entirety of the journey through someone's career, which I think is a hugely important and slightly different conversation to the one about recruitment and selection, which often dominates this discussion, as I've said. So we've just got 5 more minutes before we need to finish the webinar, and I'm just keen to get any last reflections. You've seen I've only covered a small number of the questions that we had prior to this this webinar. There were just too many to do them all justice. But are there any last points that you'd like to make, or questions you think we haven't answered yet, which really need an answer before we close? And perhaps I could come to you first, Raf, on this one, and then I'll go to Chris.
No, I don't think so, actually. I mean, I could spout more data, but it's getting boring, isn't it? Over to Chris.
I don't find data boring, Ralph. I think it's extremely interesting. I just think that we need to make sure that we don't let our foot off the gas. My biggest fear at the pandemic, when it was reality, was that one of the easiest things that firms could stop investing in and prioritizing would be diversity. Thankfully, and I'm sure this is the case for RAF, thankfully, that hasn't happened.
No, they haven't. It's been great. It's been great.
And you've actually had the opposite, and I think that has been facilitated, albeit off the back of tragic circumstances with the murder of George Floyd, but also the fact that people recognise that the socially mobile, irrespective of any other diversity characteristic, are the most impacted out there in terms of diversity strands at the moment, and therefore that's why the commitments we're seeing from law firms and corporates into what we're trying to achieve at AS and the AS Foundation and Prime is so encouraging that the profession acknowledges that this is more important than ever, and actually the cyclical nature of the recruitment process is crucial as well, because 3 years ago there was one firm that I won't name that did fantastically well in terms of recruitment of diverse candidates, our members in particular. But fast forward 3 years and they've dropped off the face of a cliff, and they've not got the results that they did previously, because it is a cyclical issue, and we've got to keep we've got to stay in 4th or 5th gear. Ideally we'd be in 6th, but we've got to stay in a top gear here, because if we don't do that, and if we take our foot off the gas at any point, it is going to have an impact on the future of the profession, on the partnership in years to come. Because you can't just magic lawyers up. You can't just encourage non-white lawyers to stay in the profession. You can't just encourage women to progress to senior ranks. This is something which is there's a longevity to it, and if we don't keep it up now at the junior ranks and identify act on the points and get results from some of the points we've covered today, it's going to impact the leadership, and we're going to be in the same position in another 10-20 years time.
Okay, well, it's a good if challenging message to end on. And lots of great insights from everyone, from both of you particularly. So I'm very grateful to you for making your time available today and for giving us the benefit of your separate and collective expertise. It's quite clear that But we have, between us all, an awful lot more to do in this space. And as you've just said, Chris, it's not something that we can kind of, put on the slow track or do today and forget tomorrow. But it's also clear to me that this isn't something that one organisation can do. It's not something you can mandate. It's not something you can force. It will take all the tools in our collective toolbox to really get the steps that we want to take, and the action and the outcomes that we all want to see. So at the SRA, we will obviously play our part. We have a huge number of resources on our website, but we're always keen to have more. And we want to work with others all the time. So if you think that you have an idea or you're part of an initiative we should know about, please do get in touch. And until then, thank you very much to everyone who's joined us. I hope you found it useful, and thanks again to our speakers. Have a great afternoon.